The 3DS can play DS and 3DS games, sure, but did you know it can play Virtual Boy in actual 3D, emulate a surprising number of consoles, stream games like Fortnite or even Switch games smoothly, and a ton more? The 3DS is now 13 years old, and you may have noticed a lot of buzz recently about how awesome they are to use today. And they're right. This is for a number of reasons, but a couple of the big ones are its soft modability, as in how easy it is to jailbreak this thing, as well as the massive library of console and portable games the 3DS can play both natively and through emulation. Speaking of emulation performance, it's worth noting early in the video that there are two fairly different breeds of 3DSs, what we'll refer to as the OG 3DS and the new 3DS, which for those who don't know, the OG 3DS refers to the run from 2011 to 2014 or 15, and then at that point they released their new 3DS line, which, unlike with New Coke, the new in this title actually means improvements. Notably in the addition of a C-stick, L2 and R2 buttons, a sleeker console redesign, better 3D effect through face tracking, and perhaps the most important to us emulation nerds, increased RAM and processing power. There were only a handful of games made exclusively for the new 3DS, such as Minecraft, but in most cases certain games just received special enhancements, like the ability to use the added C-stick for camera controls in Majora's Mask, or for quick smash attacks in Smash Bros. So as we check out the many things your 3DS can do today, I'll make sure to note how it performs on both an OG 3DS and a new 3DS if there's a difference. And yes, the 2DS also exists. There's the regular 2DS and then the new 2DS XL. If you have one, you know who you are. So in the video, I'll be hopping between my OG 3DS XL, which I've had for 11 years, and my new prized possession, my new 3DS Majora's Mask Special Edition, which I never thought I'd get to own since they sold out of all of them at like midnight on their release in 2015. But I actually got this guy from RedProClub.com, and they also saved me a ton of time by pre-installing Luma custom firmware, and also preloading it with a ton of games, which if you've ever installed a bunch of CIA files one at a time, you know how tedious it is to go in and unwrap each one as it gets installed in the 3DS home menu. They also sell a bunch of other beautifully restored pre-modded systems, as well as flashcards like the EverDrive for the 64. So if you want to pick one of these up for yourself and save yourself a bunch of time, check out redproclub.com directly or use the link in the description for 10% off your order. So let's get into things. Now, I will assume that you have a soft modded 3DS already. If yours is stock, then you can just hop over to 3dshacks.guide, and from there you can grab the latest appropriate guide for your particular system. So first off, 3DS games. You might be surprised to know that the 3DS plays 3DS games really well. No way. Jokes aside, I don't know if we always give the proper credit to how many great games were released on the 3DS, including HD remasters of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, Mario Kart 7, which yes is the official predecessor to Mario Kart 8, which we've had for like the last decade, so it's a pretty substantial entry into the franchise, multiple entries to the Mario & Luigi RPG franchise, the first ever way to play Smash Bros on a portable handheld, and a bunch of other games that don't have Mario in them, but they're good too. Sorry, I'm a fanboy. But with a modded 3DS today, you can actually digitize your entire game library by dumping the game cartridges to an installable CIA file just using the God Mode 9 software you probably already have on your 3DS from when you soft modded it. That way you can leave your games safely at home and carry many more games with you than those little slots in the carrying cases ever could. And if in the event you've damaged one of your original game cartridges on a modded 3DS, you also have access to things like the H-Shop and the Ghost eShop, which can be used to grab fresh digital copies of those games. Hot tip, if you use one of these services and a game you downloaded crashes when you open it, you probably just need to hop into the FBIA app, choose titles, and then find the game in question and select Import Seed, which worked for me. Also in the H-Shop or one of its cousins like Universal Updater, you can also find updates and now unavailable DLC for your games, like for example when Smash Bros was hanging on the level selection screen for me, but then I grabbed an update file from the H-Shop and all was well. One more H-Shop nugget, I highly recommend trying the wonderful native Mario 64 port, which runs pretty well on the OG 3DS and beautifully on the new 3DS. You'll see both the standard and MKST versions in the H-Shop, and on the new 3DS both run amazingly well, but bonus points to the standard version, which moves the HUD elements to the bottom screen and also adds a mini-map overlay of the area you're in, which is really nice. Like, it feels like that's how Nintendo would have ported Mario 64 to the 3DS if they wanted to. Plus, you get improved camera controls with the C-Stick, which is a huge win. The one thing I wish I could do with the Mario 64 port would just be to import my existing save file that I have from the Moopin 64 emulator that I was running on a different platform. I messed around in a hex editor trying to figure out which bits needed to move over into the bin file that the port looks to for its save data, but I had no such luck. So if you know how to do this, please let me know in the comments and you will become one of my close and dear friends. Now, most of you probably know that that the 3DS can play DS games since it's been able to do that since it launched in 2011. But did you know it can natively play Game Boy Advance games as well, since the 3DS has a DS inside of it, but the DS always had a Game Boy Advance inside of it, and so thanks to soft modding, you can unlock that capability and play Game Boy Advance games natively and super cleanly, which is a huge win since there are more than 2,000 games released for the DS and over 1,500 for the Game Boy Advance. So for those counting at home, that's another 3,500 games that the 3DS can now play. Quick tip when playing DS games using the Twilight menu, it took some digging for me to find that the keyboard shortcut is left trigger, D-pad down, and select to then be able to quit and return to the Twilight menu without having to back all the way out and then go back into the Twilight menu, in case you're wondering. And before we get into the even fancier stuff the 3DS can do, let's take a second and cover some of the useful party tricks it can do as well. First, you may have seen the hardware mod that adds a USB-C video out to the 3DS for display capture and projection, but there are also a couple of ways to wirelessly stream the 3DS's display to your computer, which you can then put on a TV, essentially turning it into a console. The first and probably more performant streaming option is Arctic Base, which lets you stream your games to a receiving emulator like Citra on your computer, assuming you can still find a download of it, which is a really slick way to essentially dock your 3DS like a Switch and also keep your save files located on one cartridge. The other option is a combination of SnickerStream and Boot NTR, which can stream your 3DS to a receiving program on your computer, which you could also combine with a tool like Input Redirection to sort of indirectly pair a controller to your 3DS and use it in a sort of console or Switch mode, which is pretty cool. Other party tricks include some cool homebrew applications like ThirdTube, which restores the ability to play YouTube on your 3DS, NDS Forwarder for launching DS games in the Twilight menu directly from the 3DS home screen, FTPD for copying and moving files around on your 3DS without having to remove your SD card, which I use as often as possible so I don't have to take the backplate off of my new 3DS, which is where the micro SD card slot is hiding. Wamiibo for spoofing Amiibo characters in games that might unlock special content if one is present, and Checkpoint, which is a super useful way to extract and copy saves between consoles and emulators, or even just take snapshots of your save files to revert back to. And later in the video I'll talk about how I copied my saves from my OG 3DS to my new 3DS, by the way. Real quick before we continue, I'll mention that we actually have a store for the channel now. It's Coulter.store. We've got shirts like this, more shirts, cool console neon ones, desk mats, and more on the way, so check it out, Coulter.store, and hope you like it. Back to games, let's talk about SNES emulation on the 3DS. Obviously, both versions of the 3DS can handle NES and similar era emulation without a problem, since Nintendo released many NES Virtual Console titles to the 3DS since its launch. But emulating SNES games is actually a bit of a stretch for the OG 3DS. Don't get me wrong, it can run fine, but I've also had to play with the frame skip settings a couple of times on the OG 3DS to make games a little more playable. Whereas on the new 3DS, it can play SNES games like a champ, and Nintendo themselves kind of confirmed that it can by releasing their own copies of SNES games in the SNES Virtual Console that were exclusive for the new 3DS. Which means you actually have a nice choice on the new 3DS between sideloading the official Virtual Console versions of your favorite SNES games, or loading up those ROMs in SNES 9X. Both options give you nice to have features like save states, but I do like to keep my save data files pretty accessible so that I can copy them between different emulators and devices, so SNES 9X is my go-to choice. Speaking of Nintendo console emulation, one very recent and cool addition to the 3DS emulator family is a very cool and polished emulator called Red Viper, which is a Virtual Boy emulator. Not only does it play Virtual Boy games perfectly well, but it also recreates the originally intended 3D effect of the Virtual Boy goggles through the stereoscopic 3D of the 3DS. I actually played the Virtual Boy's Mario Tennis title for the first time in this way, and it actually looks and plays awesome. Dare I say I actually had a lot of fun playing Virtual Boy this week. It took 29 years for someone to say that about the Virtual Boy. As for the Nintendo 64, this is definitely one that should really only be played on the new 3DS. Unless you're cool playing your games on mute to try and boost performance on the OG 3DS, but even on the new 3DS you'll be playing with some frame skip settings trying to smooth certain titles out. However, you can consult this compatibility list of games on the GBA temp wiki, and I found that if a game is listed in green, it actually plays quite smoothly, such as Mario Kart 64. Now let's really push our luck and see how the PS1 fares on the 3DS. And to do that, we'll need to use the PCSX rearm core for RetroArch. I'm not really even going to try this on the original 3DS, as I knew it'd still be a stretch for the new 3DS to get playable frame rates with PS1 games, but after messing around with a bunch of settings that someone kindly summarized in the Reddit post linked in the description, I was able to get Crash Bandicoot running at a smooth 30 frames per second. However, other games like Jedi Power Battles simply wouldn't proceed past certain loading screens, so if you want to do a lot of PS1 gaming on the go, I'd recommend just using a hacked PSP instead. Now, if you think that I was gaslighting you with that thumbnail and being able to run games like Breath of the Wild or Halo on the 3DS, not as much as you think, because although obviously playing modern AAA games on the 3DS would require a really extensive native port that probably no one's going to put the time into, it's actually still possible thanks to Reddit user DerailTV/GitHub user Zoe Jodan, who delved deep both into the Moonlight codebase and the 3DS platform to make a pretty fantastic port of the Moonlight streaming client for the 3DS. I got my 3DS connected to my ROG Ally using the open source Moonlight server Sunshine on the Ally, which side note works on all graphics cards, not just NVIDIA ones. And I was very surprised at how fluid a frame rate I was getting and how the 3DS controls worked great out of the box. There are even settings for adjusting your streaming bitrate, swapping the face buttons between Nintendo mode and Xbox mode, and switching around the outer and inner bumpers on the 3DS for games like Rocket League, where you need to have R2 pressed down constantly. It felt pretty surreal to be playing modern games like Rocket League, Halo, and Breath of the Wild on the 3DS, and I highly recommend giving it a go if you want to try this unnaturally delightful gaming experience. Take that, PlayStation Portal. Outside of gaming, there are also just a lot of cool themes you can choose from on your modded 3DS using Anemone? We're gonna go with that. And essentially in the app, you just press Y to preview a theme, and then when you find one you like, you just hold A on it, and then while holding it, press D-pad up, release A, and then when it's installed, you just press the leave icon on the touchscreen, and then the home button, which effectively reloads the home menu, and then you'll see your new theme right away. Now, if you've got access to more than one 3DS and you want to copy saves between them, or maybe you want to copy saves to or from an emulator of some kind, this is how I did it. Essentially, I just opened Checkpoint on the old 3DS, held Y to select all, pressed L to back them all up, which dumps them all onto the SD card. Then I popped the SD card into my computer, hopped over to the saves folder, which is located inside the 3DS and Checkpoint folders, copied those over to that same folder on the other 3DS. You can use FTP or just put the memory card in your computer. And then I just opened Checkpoint on the other 3DS, held B to refresh the list of games, and then I just selected the title I wanted to restore the game for and hit restore. I did find I had to open the game first on the receiving 3DS before it would show up as an available game to import a save into, so just an FYI on that. Last but certainly not least, on cool things you can do on your 3DS today, you can actually still play it online thanks to the fan-run Pretendo servers, which we actually did a whole video about. So check out that video if you want to connect your 3DS or your Wii U to those servers so that you can continue enjoying those online-driven games like Mario Maker for 3DS, which is basically broken without online access, or good old Mario Kart. I saw a comment on another video recently, which I think sums up the 3DS's newfound hype pretty well, in that the 3DS has no subscriptions, no ads, and you don't even need to log in to use the system. In other words, it just plays a lot of good games well in a delightful clamshell form factor. So yeah, I love my 3DS's, even 13 years after they were released, to the point where I'm even tempted to do a challenge video where I game exclusively on one of these for 30 days, so let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But that's all for today. Let me know if I missed any of your favorite tricks that the 3DS can do. I'd love to hear. Subscribe, tip out the channel, and we'll see you next week.